Welcome to another edition of Politics and Rent. My name is Egberto, Willies, your host. Today, we are honored to have Walt Rowen. Walt Rowen is a small business owner. He's the Small Business of America Future co-chair and president of the Susquehanna Glass Company in Columbia, Pennsylvania. Like many small businesses, he is currently feeling the pain of Trump's tariffs. While a lot of his materials are made in the U.S., a lot of supplies are imported from other countries like China and Mexico. Good day, Mr. Rowen. How are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm fine. Thank you for asking.
Well, let me first ask you, tell me a little bit about your particular business, because I think what many Americans need to understand is we no longer live in that kind of a country, or anybody live in any country that's insular. That is the past. Tell us a little bit about your company, your production model, etc.
Well, actually, we're very interesting. We are a third generation. So it was my grandfather and his older brother, but it was started in 1910. And it was basically a decorating or a design and decorating company in the domestic glass industry here in the United States. The glass industry was making household products, wine glasses, barware, tumblers, vases. Our company designed the product, had the molds made, and then placed the molds with the factories that produced the glass, mostly in West Virginia and Western Pennsylvania. They made the glass for us, shipped it back to us in Eastern Pennsylvania. And then we turned around and sold it through a series of sales reps and trade shows to retail stores around the country, which ultimately went to the consumer. So we were in the domestic handmade glass industry for the bulk of the early years of the company's history. So from, say, 1915 all the way up to about 1950, we were doing that. The domestic glass, handmade glass industry essentially collapsed starting in the 1960s and probably finished completely by the 1980s or 1990s. Part of that was just simply, it was an older industry. It wasn't maintaining its, bringing in new people. It wasn't creative. But also it collapsed because of the opening of the European factories that were behind the Iron Curtain in the 1970s. So Czechoslovakia, Poland, Romania were closed to the U.S. market pre 1960, 1970. When they opened up, most of the big department stores that were buying products domestically were able to go overseas and started to buy from those factories. They came out of a communist system, so they had no sense of what costing and profitability was compared to U.S. factories. And so what would have cost $2 from a domestic factory, you could buy it for 25 cents. So that was sort of a good example of how industries and globalization can ruin or tear apart an industrial base here in this country. But I want to also say that part of that was self-induced. The factories were having a hard time getting workers. They weren't keeping up. The owners weren't putting money back into the industry. So there's a huge number of reasons why this process happens. It's not just simply that we were being taken advantage of, which is the sort of the thought today from the administration. That's just not true.
That was never really true, right?
It was never true. No.
People, businesses, the reality is every business uses the concept of the efficient allocation of resources. And in so doing, the efficient allocation of resources in the case of an industry where a lot of Americans didn't want to work in a factory that had a lot of heat to make your product, as I've imagined, and other places had people who wanted to build that. The allocation of resources moved it that way. That isn't to say there aren't reasons for tariffs. There are reasons, but that isn't one of them. Now, how is the current tariff model affecting your business in particular? And then we can expand that a bit further.
So let me take the history or the story a little bit further. What we did as a factory, because we have a 30,000 square foot factory here in Pennsylvania. We've employed, right now I've got about 40 full-time employees. We've had upwards of 120 employees at different times. We also tend to be very seasonal. So because we sell a consumer product, a Christmas season, fourth quarter is very busy for us. That's always been the case. So we've had lots of issues with manufacturing. We are representative of we're not making the raw product, but we're decorating the product. We're adding value to it. Today, what we did, instead of becoming an importer, like a lot of the other companies that were doing what we did in the domestic industry previously, we decided to stay as a manufacturer, as a decorator. So today we decorate a lot of other products in addition to glassware, although glass is still probably about 60% of what we do. We're decorating with a hand decorating process. We're doing color screening. We're using new technology with lasers and sandblasting equipment. So we're doing a variety of different decorating processes on glass, ceramics, metal products. So it's a broad range of processes and products. Most of the glass that we use, we are still able to buy domestically. It's not the handmade glass industry any longer. It's the machine-made glass domestic industry. So when you can have major technologies and efficiencies, you can still produce well in the United States. So you don't lose all of your industries. And the machine-made glass industry in the United States is a good example of it. It's still fairly healthy.
Now, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Just finish. We cannot find domestic ceramic coffee mugs. We cannot find domestic metal travel tumblers, the double-walled, heat-resistant travel tumblers. So we're buying those from importers or buying them from overseas. We also buy high-end glass from countries like Italy and Germany. So we buy a lot domestically, but we also source from importers and buying from other countries as well. So with tariffs, it right now is a completely frozen situation. Best example is China has something like 150% tariff. I'm not even sure what it is right now.
145.
145. So we buy through an importer. We buy a lot of ceramic coffee mugs. Important part of our business. Coffee mugs cost us through the importer, let's say $2. They range from $2 to $3, whatever. But at $2, and tariffs were probably somewhere in the 10 to 15% range. So at $2, 10%, that's
30 cents. Yeah, 20 cents to 30 cents. Yeah.
Duty rate, which is the other term for tariffs. That's what duties have been on those kinds of products. All of a sudden, the importer, who's got containers coming of coffee mugs that he's ordered from the factories in China 6 months ago, they're coming in constantly. And when they hit the ports right now, the tariff is now, instead of 10%, it's 145% on top of probably the 10% tariff. Mm-hmm. So if you take an item and if I'm buying it at $1, say $2, now suddenly that same item is instantly going to become $5.50. Cost to me.
Yeah.
Cost to me. The importer doesn't have a lot of margins. He's not going to absorb the 145% extra cost. So he's going to pass it on to me. I'm going to decorate that product. And instead of it being a $12 or $15 decorated coffee mug, it's now going to be a $25 or $30 decorated coffee mug. So absolutely, no question, no economist will argue the fact that tariffs are passed through to the ultimate consumer. You raise tariffs on products, and even in our case, it's a part of a finished product that we produce. It will, without a doubt, increase the cost of the product to the consumer substantially, if you have raised tariffs at that 145% rate. And even the 20, 30% rate that theoretically is going to be applied, it all is going to instantly increase products to the consumer, period. That's a fact. There's no other alternative answer to that.
I am glad the way that you articulated it from the point of view of that one product or family of products that you sell. But I want to expand that a bit more for the audience, because for the audience who believe they don't have the empathy for the American business person who's importing all this stuff, I want them to realize several things that you've said in your narrative. One, a lot of the materials that you built over here in the past that is now done in let's say overseas, when it comes in here, there's a magic thing that you do with it. You added value to this thing that came to here. And adding value means having workers, they're no longer blowing the molding or blowing the glass that you did, but you have a new skill set that more Americans are willing to do in America. So the idea, go ahead.
And in a sense, it's developed. It's the future.
It's evolved.
It's not bad. It's good.
Right. It has evolved. And that is what good business is about. I mean, there is bad business, but good business is that type of where there is a symbiotic relationship between what's done locally and what's done externally. Yes. What the president has done is he has simply used an axe, a chainsaw, in the way he has implemented policies that now doesn't only harm good businesses and bad businesses alike, but the American people. Now, much of this, Walt, is really a backdoor way to raise taxes on you, the average business, and the American citizen. My question to you: you are soon to be the leader of small business for America's future. If you're not already the chair, are you the chair already, or?
Well, we call ourselves co-chairs. There's 3 or 4 of us that are in our own businesses in some way or another. And we are supporting the organization, which essentially is trying to represent what we call Main Street small business of America. The U.S. government defines small business as any business under 500 employees.
Right.
Us, 200 to 500 is a mid-sized company. That's right. Big. And it's not that we are excluding anybody, but we want to speak for that small entrepreneur. It might be your hairdresser. It might be the baker down the street. It might be, the restaurateur. So what we do is we send out a lot of surveys trying to capture information about what is going on in the heads of the small business folks in America. And most of the time people say, well, are you bipartisan? And most of our surveys, when we get them back, we break down into 3s. A third of the people responding are Republican leading, a third are Democratic leading, and a third are independent. So we really believe that we're capturing the mainstream voice for non-corporate business America.
Well, I think what you just said is very important, but I also think that you are the heart of America. Small business of your size represent most people in America. You mentioned the hairdresser, the barber, the restaurant owner, all these folks. There is a fallacy that all businesses like you are looking for is to squeeze the employee and to just make it for yourself. And in such a light, always go for a type of policy that harms. I listened to your story and I've heard, and I'm trying to pull out a whole lot of these stories of what true, good American businesses are doing. I'm not talking about the parasites. I'm talking about the good American businesses that are trying to make a buck and at the same time trying to give a good living to other people. My issue many a times, Walt, is that your voice isn't heard loud enough. The voices that are generally heard are the ones that are not doing what you are doing, are not there to add value, but are there to use what's brought into this country as just what eliminates those that are here. I wanted to distinctly point out in your business model, you add value, you employ, you make lives better for others. How do we get your voice and other businesses doing that type of work into the fold? And how do you make your presence known much better?
Yeah. So I appreciate what you're saying. I'm going to agree with most of what you're saying. I use the term non-corporate small business compared to corporate big business. What I also want to say and make clear is that each of those categories are not innately good or bad.
True.
Corporate America is not bad. Small business America is not always good.
True.
There are differences between them, but there's also enormous similarities. The one similarity is that in America, business is a capitalistic structure, and all of the owners, the people that own the businesses, ultimately need to make money, have a profit in order to continue to do what they're doing. So, corporate America has a much more complex ownership structure and also management structure. So, corporate America often is across many, many different communities. So one of the really differences between corporate and small business America is that small businesses are almost always in one community. They're embedded in Columbia, Pennsylvania. I've been here as a business for 115 years. A lot of my people walk to work. I know the kids of my employees. So my business decisions and my core values as a small business are just naturally more connected to my community. So my decision, I'm going to take my factory and move it to China because I could do that and theoretically decorate glass cheaper in China, is way more complex for me because there's so many values that I'm going to rip apart if I do that. And I'm just not going to do that. Number one, I more than likely don't have the resources to do that. Corporate America does. Small business doesn't. So we're not thinking about that. But even if we thought about it, I don't think we'd do it because we're just connected differently. It doesn't mean that corporate America is disconnected from people and disconnected from their communities, but they are far more likely to make decisions that don't absolutely come out of what's best for the community. They have to make decisions about what's best for their investors, their total. And that's not bad necessarily. But if you go back to the models that we're talking about, why did big department stores decide to go over to Europe to buy product over there? Well, because they could make more money, but also they could give the ultimate consumer a better product. So there's a whole lot of stuff that goes on in there. But being rooted and connected to the community also makes us, I believe, more willing to understand the values of the society and how we collectively need to work together. And our government is part of that society, and government isn't always the bad guy. In many cases, government can really bring services and value to our community that the individual entrepreneurs, the business community can't. So something as simple as I employ a lot of people. One of the biggest barriers to having people come into work for me is they have kids. Childcare is a huge issue in America today. If the United States as a government would take on childcare as an extension of education, we accept the idea that in American society, once your kid is in school, you as a parent are freed up from having to take care of your kid because the school does that. And they're doing lots of stuff. And most of our education is government-based schools. That's historically been a huge asset to the United States. If we would add childcare, that would be incredible.
And to interrupt a bit, first of all, let me just tell you, I love all that you had to say. I differ with you slightly on the benevolency of corporations and why I think regulations are so important for corporations, because what you do in your community and the love that you show for community and the responsibility that you show for your workers, it's because it's inherent to you. It's not capitalism. It's inherent to you as a good free enterprise type business person. If we want that society for all, in my humble opinion, that in the corporate sector, where I agree with you that it has a different model with shareholders, etc., your benevolence has to be somehow regulated on the corporate level. You don't have to agree with that, but that's my thought. Secondly, when you talk about the one thing your employees would do well by is having institute somewhat, as we find in some of our more our countries like Denmark and other, more support for our kids. And likewise, I imagine every single year that you have to renew healthcare for your employees, it's a headache. How am I best going to give them a good value? That is something else that shouldn't be under your control. You make glass. You may be the best glass maker in Pennsylvania.
Decorate glass.
Decorate glass. Yes. Decorate glass. Well, you used to make it, but you decorate it now. And that is great. That is what you excel at. You don't excel at finding healthcare for your workers. That's another domain. That's right. I like where you're going, but this conversation kind of veered off a bit. This is on tariffs. And I appreciate you illustrating exactly how tariffs affect your business, your particular business, but that just as it affects your business, it affects every single business in America, because we are no longer is any business can say, I'm here in my studio. Most of this stuff wasn't made here, and I'm a red-blooded, proud to be American person, but I still need this equipment. Please give me a closer, Walt.
I can't overemphasize how drastic this sudden change in American trade policy is to not just small business, to the U.S. economy, but to the world economy. And because it was done in a very snap way, instantaneously, it is so disruptive and will just devastate whole industries if it's not dialed back down and managed in a way that is far more thoughtful and just simply, it's based on principles that aren't true.
Walt, your words and the words of many other sensible business people, once heard by the appropriate forces, I think will make a difference. I think this is going to be temporary pain, but I think it's going to make a difference. We've been speaking to Walt Rowen, Small Business for America's Future co-chair and president of the Susquehanna Glass Company in Columbia, Pennsylvania. Thank you so kindly for having spoken to Politics Done Right.
I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
We spend a lot of time deconstructing the news, trying to parse it into a form that everybody can understand. We try to find those little nitpicks where it flies above the fray, etc. If you really like these videos that we do, I want to ask a big favor. Please go ahead. Number one, subscribe to our channel, and number two, please join if you can. Thank you so kindly for watching. Keep watching. Please remember to share. We must populate the entire internet with our progressive message, a message that we know is what most Americans say that they want. So help us, please join.